the stories. Phone recording documented their final minutes. The file that surfaced last winter was short and brutal, and local dispatch confirmed the voices matched a missing maintenance pair. Greta Lyle, 32, a small-town reporter, listened 3 times before writing anything because the last minute hid everything important. Greta lived in a valley where the hills felt close and the roads curled between pines that ate cell bars after mile 6. Her editor wanted a follow-up on the county's mothballed call boxes, and she planned a simple piece about budgets and weathered steel. The plan changed when a man left a padded envelope at the office desk, and the receptionist slid it toward Greta. Inside lay a cheap thumb drive and a handwritten note that said, "Play it now," which was not exactly subtle guidance. The audio began with tires crushing wet grit and a fan belt squeal, then a breathy laugh that carried a little nervous catch. A woman said, "Hit record anyway," and a man replied, "We will just send it to Burgess later," and gravel pinged the undercarriage. Greta paused there and rewound because archived calls mentioned a supply clerk named Burgess, and the tone was easy routine. Dispatch had logged their crew leaving the yard after lunch, and the destination was a ranger turnout near a decommissioned radio tower. The county named them as Mara Keene, 29, and Colby Ash, 33. Both contract road technicians paid hourly wages. They were fixing marker posts along a flood reroute where tourists kept missing the detour, according to a memo Greta later obtained. She kept a yellow notebook, and she recorded exact timestamps straight from the audio, then cross-matched with the dispatch exit time. Static rose and fell like weak FM, which fit a corridor where the timber wall trapped signals, something locals complain about every spring. The woman on the file spoke again, and her voice changed colors like people do when they feel watched, but pretend they do not. "Do you see that cone?" she asked, and the man said, "Not our brand." Then the truck door chirped, then another small, impatient silence. 2 clicks sounded like metal against plastic, which Greta later matched to the folding rod used to set reflective stakes at bends. A train horn cried far away with 2 short blasts, then 1, and Greta wrote that pattern down and circled it 3 times. A witness told her a freight line hugs the river, and the drainage there creates its own echo that stacks horns out strangely. If the pattern matched that schedule, she could place the recording on a map within minutes, which is all any timeline really needs. At 23 minutes in, a male voice new to the scene drifted across the microphone, thin and half-carried by the wind. "You folks need a hookup," he said. And a second voice we never hear again muttered something that sounded like numbers and road letters. Greta paused again and wrote an underline under the word hookup because that is tow slang, and Colby worked nights at an actual wrecker. He would not pay cash for a roadside pull unless something felt wrong, and the county did not call contractors to rescue their own truck. Colby said, "We are good," and the stranger answered, "Road is closed ahead," which matched a rumor about impassable washouts that week. Greta called the county shop and asked about the washouts, and a foreman said the road was soft but open with flagged cones. The file captured an engine idling close, and a beeper chirped 3 times, the exact rhythm used by older reverse alarms on flatbeds. A chain clinked against a bumper, and the woman whispered, "We should go." Then the phone scuffed fabric as someone reset their grip. Greta listened to that fabric sound again and again because the microphone scraped a zipper, which gave brand and suggested jacket style. She went to the surplus store and found county-issued windbreakers with chunky metal pulls that rasp exactly like the noise at 19. The envelope had no return address, but courier records put it at a copy shop where a camera watched the counter until closing time. The clerk remembered a man with a field jacket and a gray cap, and he bought a single USB stick with cash and no receipt. Greta did not print that part, and she did not share it with anyone besides her editor, because he asked for caution and patience. Instead, she drove the turnout on a weekday afternoon and brought a friend who knew rail schedules, then they listened at the shoulder. The freight line sang through the ravine, and the horn called twice, then once, and the echo folded back with the same aching cadence. She drew a circle over the map where that sound best fit, then paced off the shoulder and found a rut that bit deep and straight. Down the slope, Hidden by alder, lay an abandoned call box faceplate with new screws driven into old holes, clean and too shiny. The county had removed the boxes after a storm in 2019, and crews reported salvage thieves yanking wire for quick cash. Greta photographed the screws and the plate, then noted fresh shoe prints with a square heel that looked like a hardware store special. Her phone had no bars, so she returned to town and requested traffic camera pulls for the nearest intersection where coverage still worked. A state tech sent stills from a ridge camera that framed taillights heading toward the turnout after midday in a light, steady rain. One frame showed a retired tow truck with faded lettering, and the next showed the county pickup tucked behind it like a shy cousin. Greta played the audio again and caught a faint double click at 29, the sound of a handheld radio powering and squelching. That detail mattered because the county monitors one frequency while tow outfits use another, and she recognized the wrong hiss entirely. She interviewed a grocery clerk who stocked drinks near the bin of hand warmers, and he remembered selling 2 sleeves to a road tech. The receipt time sat within 10 minutes of the exit log, and his detail about the jacket patch matched the issued windbreakers perfectly. A bartender at the junction recalled a flatbed guy bragging about his old badge from a volunteer rescue club that folded years ago. He liked to flash it to get lanes cleared, and he kept a coil of chain in the cab, and he always smelled like 2 cycle gas. Greta ran the plate fragments from the ridge stills through a spreadsheet of county surplus auctions, and one number set rang familiar. A retired truck had been sold to a seasonal contractor 5 years back, and that contractor worked grading crews through 3 winters. She asked the yard boss for copies of work orders and found add-ons for road closures that never reached the public board for posting. 3 were billed to a line called Emergency Barricade Verification, which can pass quiet if everyone is cold and trying to go home. Greta returned to the file and let the final minute run without a pause, and the sound tightened like a knot being cinched hard. "Back it down," said the stranger, and another voice said, "Winch." Then the engine strained, then the woman whispered, "No, wait, please." Her phone captured boots on gravel and a hollow shutter like a box panel being struck by a fist, then a clatter of chains settling again. Colby said, "We are leaving," and the stranger replied, "Road is closed." Then something metallic squealed, and the microphone hit the seat. Greta recognized the squeal later when a mechanic showed her a retired foot brake on that model, which locks if someone yanks hard. A second engine revved and then drifted away, and the train horn cried again, which pinned the window tighter than any wristwatch could. The file ended with water, sound, and wind, and then a barely audible sentence that a lab enhanced for the sheriff before the case closed. A female voice whispered, "He is not alone," which fits the bartender's story, and one traffic still that shows a second vehicle tailing the flatbed. Greta never wrote the name of the contractor who later died in a solo wreck on a dirt connector above the timber line in early spring. The county cited the company for unpermitted closure devices, and a civil suit settled quietly after an insurance review and sealed filings. The recording was cited in the settlement as contemporaneous documentation, which means the phone created a timeline that prosecutors trust completely. It helped link unreported cones, a counterfeit callbox faceplate, and an old truck beeper that chirped a signature 3-note pattern. Greta visited the turnout one more time when the snow melted, and she stood where the ruts cut dark through the alder roots. She listened for horns and for chain, and she watched the waterline move, and she wrote names she would never print anywhere. A retired dispatcher took her call and confirmed that a training tape from 2015 uses the same 3 beeper chirps. It teaches rookies to ignore unauthorized closures unless a county badge verifies, because anyone can buy cones and a safety vest. Greta asked him what he remembered most from long nights watching a map blink, and he said mistakes always make more sound than luck. He said a good tech marks those sounds. Then he asked if she could hear her own pencil scratching when she replayed the last minute. She told him yes, and she told him about the zipper scrape that matched the metal pull, and he laughed, then he went quiet. He said that noise meant the person tried to pocket the phone without breaking the recording, which is a trick dispatchers teach. The bartender called once more and said a woman had started bringing flowers to the turnout, and she left them at the alder cut. He asked if Greta thought the woman was family, and Greta said she did not know and that strangers honor strangers more than most. The editor killed 2 paragraphs about the towing club because it would invite noise, and he preferred the clean arc of small clues. Greta agreed, because the point was not a club or a badge or a wreck, but the way ordinary objects built a clear end. She listened one last time and heard something she had missed, which happens when minds want answers and forget to trust the quiet. The very first second carried a shy sigh like people make when they press record and pretend they are not scared of new evidence. Greta printed that detail and moved it near the top, and she explained that simple acts create proof that survives strangers and storms. She never used the word hero, and she never used wild language, and she left the title to her editor, who kept things plain. When the story ran, the county announced a permanent fund for roadside beacons that log closures to a public map without excuses. Visitors call it the green light board, and techs call it the quiet wall, and the valley calls it the keen rule. Greta keeps the thumb drive in a small drawer, and she checks the timestamps now and then, and they have not changed. She believes the last decision Mara and Colby made was to document, and that choice laid stepping stones across a very dark place. The valley will always have roads that curl into quiet, and someone will always think cones look official when no one is watching. She writes that the recording made their last minutes heavier than memory, which fades and bends, and lighter than rumor, which never ends. On clear nights, the ravine carries sound like a wire, and 2 short horn calls followed by 1 still tag the hour. Greta parks on the shoulder, keeps her phone in her pocket, and lets the quiet work without her voice explaining every piece. The story of the thumb drive is not about a monster in the trees or a curse pinned to bad weather. It is about a phone and a breath, and the way background noises can draw a map that people can follow later. She ends notes with a sentence she never printed, because printed promises feel heavier than memory deserves when strangers are gone. Someone pressed record, and someone stayed brave for long enough, and the evidence they made did not let the valley forget.
Divers opened the hatch. The crew was gone, the clocks still ticking. The cold Atlantic wind howled across the surface of the water, slicing through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade. Waves rose and fell in uneven rhythm, their crests flecked with foam under a sky still clinging to stars. It was early morning, just past 4 o'clock, on the 7th day of March in the year 1987, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Vigilant had been dispatched from Port Canaveral after an automated distress signal flickered to life from the coordinates of the Mrballin, a private research vessel registered out of Norfolk, Virginia. No voice transmission followed, only the repeating pulse of a Mayday beacon, weak but persistent, like a heartbeat fading beneath ice. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? By the time the boarding team reached the hull of the Mrballin, the sea had grown restless. Lieutenant Thaddeus Vale, a seasoned maritime investigator with the Coast Guard Search and Rescue Division, stood at the edge of the deck, gripping the rail as the swell lifted the cutter sideways. His breath came in short clouds, his eyes scanning the silent silhouette ahead. There were no lights aboard, no movement, just the creak of metal and the groan of stressed rivets echoing from within the darkened superstructure. "Something's wrong," muttered Petty Officer Lorne Kestrel, adjusting his helmet cam. He was younger, sharp-eyed, with a nervous energy that flared whenever silence stretched too long. No response to radio hails. No crew on deck. Not even a flare. Thaddeus didn't answer. He stepped forward, boots clanging against the gangplank as it settled onto the research vessel's main deck. The air smelled of salt, yes, but underneath, something sharper. Metallic, like old wiring or scorched insulation. He paused, hand resting on the hatch handle. It was warm, not from the sun hadn't risen yet, but from within. Heat radiated faintly through the steel, unnatural for a ship adrift in 38-degree Fahrenheit waters. He glanced back once. The rest of the team waited behind him, Kestrel, Ensign Marin Voss, and Medic Darren Cope. All wore full gear, thermal suits, respirators, sidearms. Protocol dictated caution when vessels went silent. But this wasn't just silent, this was absent, as if the world had exhaled and the Mrballin had been forgotten in the breath. With a slow turn, Thaddeus pulled the hatch open. A rush of stale, overheated air poured out thick with the scent of ozone and something vaguely sweet, like burnt sugar. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by emergency strips along the floor, casting long shadows up the walls. Panels hung loose from the ceiling, wires dangling like roots torn from soil. And then, there it was. The sound. Faint, rhythmic, almost musical. Clocks. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Mounted on bulkheads, bolted to consoles, taped to lockers, analog dials spinning, second hands ticking in erratic unison. Some moved forward, others backward. A few stuttered, frozen between seconds. Digital displays blinked in red, dates flashing nonsensically. January 3rd, 2005. July 9th, 1999. November 1st, 1973. None matched the current date, none made sense. But the crew gone, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no blood, no personal effects scattered. Everything was in place. Coffee cups half filled, logbooks open mid-sentence, jackets hanging neatly on hooks. A thermos sat on the galley table, still warm. Beside it, a pair of gloves' fingers curled as if recently removed. And yet, no one. Ensign Voss knelt beside a wall panel, her gloved fingers brushing over a cluster of clocks wired together with copper thread. "These aren't standard issue," she said, voice tight. "They're not even from the same manufacturer. Some look homemade." Darren Cope moved toward the sleeping quarters, door ajar, bunks made, pillows flattened, as though someone had just risen. He checked the head, the mess hall, the engine room, all empty. "It's like they vanished," he whispered. "Just stepped out of their lives." Thaddeus walked deeper into the vessel, drawn toward the central lab. That's where the heat intensified. The door was sealed shut, reinforced with a manual latch on the outside. He hesitated. Then, with a grunt, he turned the wheel and pushed. Inside, the temperature climbed near 110 degrees. Rows of monitors lined the far wall, all dark except one, a single screen glowing with shifting waveforms, pulsing in time with the ticking from the hallway. In the center of the room stood a cylindrical chamber, roughly 6 feet tall, constructed of polished steel and glass. It hummed softly, a low frequency vibrating through the floor. Wires snaked from its base into a junction box labeled Temporal Feedback Array. Do not disconnect. Thaddeus approached slowly. On the console beside the chamber, a logbook lay open. The last entry read, March 6th, 1987, final test initiated at 2200 hours. Field stabilized at 0.87 terahertz. Temporal resonance achieved. Crew reporting mild disorientation. Clock drift noted in adjacent sectors. Proceeding to Phase 3 despite protocol concerns. Dr. Corwin Hale insists integrity holds. If this works, we may witness causality inversion. God help us if we don't return. Below it, scrawled in different ink, shaky and urgent, we weren't supposed to see it. We weren't supposed to remember. The clock doesn't move forward, it chooses. It chose to erase us. Don't open the chamber, don't listen to the ticks. They're not counting time, they're counting down to when you forget too. Thaddeus stared at the page. His throat tightened. Behind him, Kestrel entered, breathing hard. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." He led Thaddeus back to the bridge. The navigation system was offline, but the backup chronometer, factory sealed, never tampered with, was spinning wildly. Not just the second hand, the entire mechanism, hour, minute, second revolving in reverse. And then, abruptly, stopping. It read, 4:17 a.m., March 7th, 1987. Exactly the time they had arrived. "No," Thaddeus breathed. "That's impossible." Kestrel pointed to the radar scope. Empty. No other vessels within 50 nautical miles, no aircraft, nothing. Yet on the communications board, the tape recorder was running. They rewound it, pressed play. Static. Then a voice, calm, familiar. It was Thaddeus's own. "This is Lieutenant Thaddeus Vale. We've boarded the Maristella at approximately 4:17 a. M crew is missing, systems compromised. Recommend immediate quarantine and retrieval. Do not approach the central chamber. Repeat, do not open it." The recording ended. Silence fell like a weight. Marin Voss looked up, face pale. That was just recorded. We haven't reported anything yet." Thaddeus turned toward the lab. The humming had changed. grown louder, more insistent. The single monitor now displayed a new message, scrolling in crisp white text. Initiation sequence repeated. Observers registered. Temporal loop confirmed. And below it, previous attempt failed. This cycle must succeed. Darren backed away, shaking his head. We weren't the first ones here, were we? Thaddeus didn't answer. He remembered the thermos, the gloves, the warmth. Someone had been here moments before, or someone would be, and they'd left clues, warnings, for themselves. Because if time wasn't linear, if the past and future could bleed into the present, then perhaps they weren't rescuers. Perhaps they were echoes. Back in the lab, the chamber began to vibrate. A thin crack appeared in the glass. From within, a shadow shifted. Not human, not quite, but familiar. As if seen in a dream, or remembered from a photograph taken years ago. And then the clock stopped. Every single one. The silence was deafening. For 3 heartbeats, nothing moved. Then, simultaneously, they restarted. But this time, they all showed the same time. 4:13 a.m., March 7th, 1987. 4 minutes earlier. Thaddeus felt it then, a pressure behind his eyes, a tingling in his fingertips. A memory surged, unbidden. Standing on this very deck, gripping the hatch, hearing Kestrel say, "Something's wrong," as if for the first time, only he hadn't remembered that before. Or had he? He turned to the others. Their faces were blank, confused, as if waking from sleep. What are we doing here?" Marin asked, blinking rapidly. "We just arrived," Kestrel said, stepping forward. No response to radio hails, no crew on deck, not even a flare. Thaddeus froze. He had heard this before. He had lived this before. And in that moment, he understood. They weren't breaking into the loop. They were trapped inside it. The Maristella wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for them to make the same mistake again. And somewhere, deep in the bowels of the ship, the chamber pulsed once, like a heart remembering how to beat. Months later, the official report listed the Maristella as lost at sea, presumed sunk during a sudden storm front. All hands missing, presumed dead, the case was closed, files archived, survivors, none. Evidence, scant. Just a few corrupted audio logs, a set of mismatched timestamps, and one handwritten note found in Thaddeus Vale's personal effects delivered to his sister's home in Asheville, North Carolina, with no return address, postmarked June 11th, 1987. The note read simply, "I remember the clocks. I remember the heat. I remember saying the same words, seeing the same faces. I don't know how many times I've lived this. But I know one thing, if you're reading this, I failed again. And you're next. Listen carefully. When you hear the ticking, don't follow it. Don't open the hatch. And whatever you do, don't trust the time on your watch." The letter was dated March 7th, 1987. But the postmark was from March 7th, 2024. And in a small attic drawer in Asheville, buried beneath old photographs and yellowed letters, a single analog clock sits untouched. Its hands have not moved in 37 years. Yet every night, at exactly 4:17 a.m., it ticks once, as if reminding someone, as if calling them back. This desert town exists to hide something. The night siren proves it. The sun had long since collapsed behind the jagged teeth of the Sierra Lomitas, painting the sky in bruised purples and fading oranges, when Elias Thorne first stepped onto the cracked asphalt of Drywater Junction. The air hung thick with dust and silence so deep it pressed against the eardrums like cotton soaked in oil. No crickets, no wind, not even the distant hum of a generator broke the stillness. Just the soft crunch of Elias's boots on gravel and the slow creak of a rusted sign above him that read, "Welcome to Drywater Population 17. That number, he would later learn, was not quite accurate and never had been. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was late September in the year 1997 when Elias arrived, a geologist contracted by the Bureau of Land Management to assess subsurface erosion patterns near the Mojave Fringe. He wasn't supposed to stay longer than 3 days. But Drywater had other plans. The town clung to the edge of the desert like a scab, refusing to heal wooden shacks leaning at odd angles, their windows boarded or shattered, paint peeled into ghostly curls. A single gas station stood open, its fluorescent light flickering like a dying heartbeat. Behind the counter sat a man named Orrin Vexley, gaunt as a scarecrow, eyes milky with cataracts that didn't quite hide the sharpness beneath. He handed Elias a room key without asking for ID, without smiling, and said only, "Don't go out after sundown, especially if you hear the siren." "I think the same." Elias laughed, then nervously, more out of discomfort than disbelief. "Siren? Like an air raid?" Orrin didn't blink, like nothing you've heard, and once you do, it stays with you, in your bones. That night, Elias lay on a lumpy cot in room 4 of the Dustvale Motel, the ceiling fan turning with a lazy metallic groan. Outside, the moon hung low and yellow, casting long shadows that seemed too tall, too thin, to belong to any natural object. He'd just closed his eyes when it came a sound so unnatural it froze the breath in his lungs. It began faintly, like whine through a canyon, but quickly swelled into a high-pitched wail, melodic yet dissonant, rising and falling in intervals that defied human tuning. It wasn't electronic. It wasn't animal, it carried weight like something ancient being dragged across stone. The siren pulsed through the walls, vibrating the glass in the window, making the metal bedframe hum. And beneath it, almost imperceptible, were voices whispering, overlapping, speaking in no language Elias recognized, yet somehow understood in flashes. "They watch from below," one seemed to say. "The hollow ones, remember." He bolted upright, heart hammering, sweat slick on his neck. He reached for the lamp, knocking over a glass of water. The siren stopped instantly. Silence crashed back like a slammed door. No birds, no footsteps, nothing. He waited nearly an hour before daring to peer outside. The street was empty, but in the dirt beside the motel's foundation, something caught his eye: footprints. Small, barefoot, too narrow to be human. They led from the edge of the lot toward the dry riverbed, vanishing where the sand turned black and glassy, as if scorched by fire. The next morning, Elias tried to ask about the siren at the diner, the Rust Spoon, a dim place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. A woman named Merelda Cray sat nursing a cup, her hair pulled back so tightly it made her cheekbones look like knife edges. She looked up when Elias mentioned the sound. "You heard it," she said flatly, not a question. "I did. What is it? Some kind of test? Military?" Merelda set her spoon down with a click. "The siren calls them, brings them closer. We used to have a curfew during the war, World War II, 1943, when the army came through. Built something underground, said it was radar, but the siren started then. First time, then stopped for years, came back in 1978, again in 1989. And now it sings every few nights." Elias frowned. "Who built it?" She leaned forward, voice dropping. "Not who, what? They weren't soldiers, not all of them. Some wore uniforms, yes, but others moved wrong. Too smooth, too quiet. One of them, he had no shadow." Elias wanted to dismiss her as paranoid, superstitious, but the footprints, the silence, the way the townspeople avoided certain streets after dark. And Orrin, when questioned, simply muttered, "We keep the lights off, we don't answer doors, and we never, ever whistle at night." Curiosity became obsession. Over the next week, Elias combed through the county archives in nearby Blythe, though most records from the mid-20th century were missing or burned. What he found instead were fragments, a classified project codenamed Operation Hollow Veil, referenced in a declassified memo from the Department of Defense dated March of 1944. Mentioned briefly, acoustic resonance experiments conducted in isolated zones intended to disrupt enemy signal propagation, but the location was redacted. Only a grid coordinate remained, plotted directly beneath Drywater Junction. He returned with a ground-penetrating radar unit borrowed under false pretenses. Working under cover of darkness, he scanned the area near the old rail spur, half a mile east of town. At a depth of 230 feet, the machine picked up a vast hollow chamber circular, approximately 300 yards in diameter. And inside, intermittent pulses of energy, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Then, on the 7th night, the siren returned, louder than before. This time, Elias was ready. He recorded it on a reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind used for field seismology. As the sound poured from the speakers in his motel room slowed to half speed, the whispers emerged clearer. Not words, more like impressions, layered beneath the tone. "We sleep beneath the salt," one seemed to convey. "The door must not open. The watcher is blind, but listens." And then, just before the tape ended, a child's voice, soft, trembling, said, "Daddy, why won't the stars come back?" Elias sat frozen, because that voice, he knew it. His own daughter, Lyra, had spoken those exact words the night before she died in a car accident 2 years prior, words never recorded, never shared with anyone. How could a desert town in California know that? He confronted Oren the next day, waving the tape. "What is this place? What are you hiding?" Oren stared at the device, then slowly reached under the counter. He placed a small object on the glass, a rusted metal disc, etched with symbols that looked neither human nor machine-made. Angular. Flowing. Alive. "This was found in the shaft," Oren said. 1951. By a miner named Heston Pike. He went mad within a week. Spent his last days scratching equations on his cell walls. Said the siren wasn't a warning, it was a lullaby, meant to keep something asleep. Elias's hands trembled. Asleep? Oren nodded. Underground. Beneath the old test site. The government thought they were building a bunker, but they weren't digging down, they were uncovering something that was already there. Long before us. Long before anything. And the siren? Elias whispered. It sings to it, calms it. When the power fails, or when someone like you pokes too hard, the song fades, and it stirs. That night, the electricity cut out across Drywater. No explanation, no surge, just darkness. Elias stood at his window, watching. Every house was dark, except one. A small cottage at the edge of town, its porch light blinking in a pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code? SOS. But no one went to help. Instead, doors locked, windows shuttered, and from somewhere far below, a deep subsonic rumble began, felt more than heard, like the earth itself grinding its teeth. Then, faint at first, the siren rose again, this time not from the town, but from beneath it. And this time, it wasn't singing to keep something asleep. It was screaming because it had woken up. Elias grabbed his gear and ran for his truck. But as he turned the key, the engine wouldn't catch. Again. Again. Nothing. He looked up and froze. Standing in the middle of the road, silhouetted by the pale moon, was a figure. Tall. Thin. Limbs too long, moving with a jerking grace, like a puppet tested by invisible strings. Its head tilted slowly, unnaturally, until it faced him. No face. Just smooth skin, stretched tight. And from its chest, where a heart should be the siren's melody, pulsed outward, vibrating the air, distorting the light. Elias stumbled back, falling against the truck. He fumbled for the tape recorder, pressed play. His daughter's voice echoed into the night. "Daddy, why won't the stars come back?" The figure paused. Then, in a voice that was not a voice, more like dozens of whispers threaded through metal, it replied, "Because we ate them." Elias didn't scream. He couldn't. His throat sealed shut, his lungs locked. The thing stepped forward, each movement accompanied by a soft chime, like glass bells underwater. But then, faint at first, a new sound joined the chorus. From the gas station, Oren had climbed onto the roof. In his hands, a battered horn, an old railroad signal, rusted and dented. He blew into it with all his strength. A deep, mournful note rolled across the desert. The figure stopped, turned. Another blast, and another. From other houses, lights flickered on, not electric oil lamps, candles. People emerged, carrying instruments, tin whistles, hand drums, a warped violin. They formed a circle around the edge of town and began to play not music, but a complex sequence of tones, rising and falling in precise patterns. The siren from beneath the earth faltered. The figure twitched, then slowly, painfully sank to its knees. Its form blurred, like heat over asphalt, and then collapsed into a pile of fine gray ash. Silence returned. But not peace. Oren approached Elias, breathing heavily, the horn dangling from his fingers. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. "Now it knows your voice, knows your grief. It'll call to you again. In dreams, in static, in the silence between radio stations. Elias swallowed. What was that thing? A scout, Oren said. A listener, sent ahead. If the song stops for too long, they send more, and if the song dies completely, he didn't finish. What happens? Oren looked toward the horizon, where the first hint of dawn stained the sky blood red. The sky goes dark, not at night, forever, and the ones below climb up. Elias left Drywater the next morning. Officially, he filed a report citing geological instability and abandoned infrastructure. Unofficially, he destroyed the tapes, except one. The one with his daughter's voice. He kept that buried in a safe behind a false wall in his Denver apartment. But sometimes, on still nights when the power blinks, he hears it a faint, melodic wail, coming not from outside, but from within the walls. And when he presses his ear to the plaster, he doesn't hear the siren. He hears knocking. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. Then a whisper. Let us sing you to sleep. To this day, no satellite imagery shows Drywater Junction clearly. Clouds always seem to gather above it, even in drought. GPS signals fail within a 5-mile radius. And travelers who claim to have passed through often cannot recall the name of the town, only the silence, only the feeling of being watched from below. And if you drive through the Mojave after midnight and your radio begins to crackle with a strange, haunting tone, do not stop, do not listen, do not answer if something calls your name in a voice you once loved. Because some towns exist not to welcome, but to warn. And Drywater is still singing. Ohio's Vanishing Room legend turned out to be a crime scene. In the quiet, rolling hills of southeastern Ohio, where the trees grow thick and the fog clings to the valley long after sunrise, there stands an old farmhouse just off State Route 327 near the unincorporated community of Gloucester. The structure, weathered by decades of wind and rain, has stood vacant since the late 1980s, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of time. Locals have long avoided it, not out of mere disrepair, but because of a story whispered in hushed tones at county fairs and over coffee at roadside diners. They call it the Vanishing Room, a place said to swallow people whole, never to be seen again. For years, it was dismissed as folklore, a ghost tale spun to scare children from wandering too far into the woods. But in the autumn of 2017, when a young man named Thaddeus Mallory disappeared without a trace, the legend took a chilling turn, because what investigators found behind those crumbling walls wasn't a myth, it was a crime scene. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It was on a crisp morning in early October, the kind where the air smells faintly of damp leaves and wood smoke curls from distant chimneys, that Sheriff Elias Crane received the call. A missing person report had been filed by the elderly aunt of Thaddeus Mallory, a 23-year-old aspiring photographer from Athens, Ohio. Thaddeus had told her he was going to explore some abandoned properties for a photo series titled Forgotten Corners. His last known message, sent via text at 6:47 in the evening on October 3rd, read, "Found something strange at the Gloucester house. The back room doesn't match the floor plan. Walls feel wrong." Then, silence. Sheriff Crane, a man with 31 years on the force and a face lined by both sun and sorrow, knew the Gloucester house by reputation only. He'd heard the stories of hikers who claimed they entered the house and exited miles away, of teenagers who swore they saw a door where none should be, opening into a space that defied logic. But he was a practical man, grounded in evidence, not superstition. Still, when no sign of Thaddeus turned up after 2 days, not at his apartment, not at his favorite diner, not even on surveillance footage from the gas station on Route 59, he ordered a search of the property. The team arrived just after dawn on October 6th, their breath visible in the pale light. The house loomed ahead, surrounded by knee-high weeds and rusted farm equipment half swallowed by the earth. Deputy Marlowe, a rookie with nerves tighter than a snare drum, led the way, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. The front door groaned open with a sound like a dying animal, releasing a wave of cold, stale air that carried the scent of mildew and something sharper, something metallic. Inside, the house was eerily intact. Dust coated every surface, but there were no signs of forced entry, no broken furniture, no struggle. It was as if time had simply stopped. Photographs still hung crooked on the walls, a calendar from 1986 frozen on the month of July. Sheriff Crane moved through the kitchen, then the parlor, calling out Thaddeus's name, his voice echoing through the hollow rooms. Nothing answered. Then they reached the hallway. It was here that things began to feel off. The corridor seemed longer than it should have been, stretching farther than the exterior walls allowed. The floorboards creaked unevenly, and the wallpaper, once floral, now peeling in long strips, pulsed faintly in the draft, as though breathing. Deputy Marlowe paused, turning to the sheriff. "Sir, did we pass that door before?" he asked, pointing to a narrow paneled entrance on the left. Crane frowned. He didn't remember it. They opened it. Beyond lay a small room no more than 10 feet by 12, but everything about it felt unnatural. The ceiling sloped downward at an impossible angle, though the house outside had a flat roof. The walls were covered in crude symbols, drawn in what later tests would confirm as human blood, layered over decades. And in the center of the floor, a circle had been etched into the wood, filled with ash and bone fragments. Most disturbing of all, the room had no window, yet a faint greenish light seemed to emanate from the corners, flickering like old television static. Sheriff Crane's radio crackled. "We've got movement on thermal," came the voice of Officer Lyle, stationed outside. "Two figures, inside the house. One near the back hall. The other, sir. The second heat signature is coming from inside the west wall." Crane turned slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the dust. There was no west wall in this room, it faced north. His pulse quickened. He stepped toward the northern wall, pressing his palm against the plaster. It gave slightly, like soft clay. He pushed harder, and his hand sank through. He yanked it back with a gasp. The hole sealed itself instantly, leaving no mark. "This isn't possible," Marlowe whispered, backing away. "This isn't real." But it was real. And worse, it was occupied. Later analysis would reveal traces of DMT and other hallucinogenic compounds in the air, suggesting someone had been burning psychoactive substances to induce altered states. But forensic teams also uncovered human remains buried beneath the floorboards, 3 sets of bones, carbon dated to the 1970s, 80s, and early 2000s. Dental records confirmed one belonged to a woman named Elspeth Vorn, reported missing in 1979 after telling friends she was investigating a doorway to another place in rural Ohio. And then there was Thaddeus. On October 9th, during a second sweep of the property, K-9 Unit Officer Renata Cho discovered a trapdoor hidden beneath a collapsed section of the basement. Behind it, a narrow tunnel descended into darkness. The walls were lined with photographs, dozens of them taken inside the vanishing room. Faces stared out from the images, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with terror. Among them was Thaddeus, captured mid-stride, unaware, seconds before vanishing from the known world. At the end of the tunnel, they found him, not alive. Not exactly. His body was seated upright, propped against the stone wall, dressed in the same clothes he'd worn the night he disappeared. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were open, pupils dilated, fixed on a point beyond the ceiling. In his lap lay a leather-bound journal filled with frantic handwriting, sketches of shifting corridors, spiraling staircases leading nowhere, and repeated phrases, "It watches, it learns. It remembers names." The final entry, dated October 4th, just one day after his last text read, "I think I'm still here. I think I never left, but something else is wearing my face now. If you find this, don't go back, don't look for the door, it knows you're looking, it's always listening." The case was officially closed in March of 2018. Authorities cited homicide, though no suspect was ever identified. The house was condemned and scheduled for demolition, but crews refused to touch it. Dynamite placed at the foundation failed to detonate. Bulldozers stalled mid-approach, engines dead despite full tanks. Eventually, the state erected a chain-link fence around the property, topped with barbed wire, and posted warning signs, "No trespassing, hazardous structure." Yet, even now, nearly 7 years later, locals report seeing lights in the windows on foggy nights. Hunters claim to hear whispers drifting through the trees, voices calling names of people who've never been to Gloucester. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, residents swear they feel a pressure behind their eyes, a sensation of being pulled not forward, but sideways into a space that shouldn't exist. The vanishing room, it seems, is not done, and perhaps it never will be. Because legends don't die in places like Ohio. They wait, they breathe, they grow hungry, and they remember. Thaddeus Mallory was not the first. He certainly won't be the last. So the next time you drive down a lonely road, past a house that looks just a little too still, a little too quiet, ask yourself, does the layout make sense? Do the doors line up? And when you pass by, do you feel, just for a second, as though the air has thickened and something on the other side of the wall has noticed you? Be careful. Some rooms don't let go. Some doors only open one way. And some houses, like the one near Gloucester, standing sentinel in the mist, don't just hold secrets, they feed on them. The investigation remained open for months, though leads dried up faster than puddles in summer heat. Psychologists analyzed Thaddeus's journal, concluding he likely suffered a psychotic break induced by toxins or isolation. Skeptics pointed to mold, carbon monoxide, or underground gas leaks as explanations for the hallucinations, but none could explain the photos. None could explain how his body appeared untouched by decay, preserved in a state that defied medical understanding. And no scientist could replicate the phenomenon of the shifting walls, the impossible geometry, the way the room seemed to exist outside normal dimensions. Dr. Corvin Hexton, a parapsychologist from Case Western Reserve University, visited the site in May of 2018. He brought with him electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and a team of graduate students. They spent 3 days collecting data. On the evening of the third day, Hexton entered the vanishing room alone, determined to meditate and record any anomalies. He never came out. Search parties combed the area for weeks. His equipment was found scattered near the basement entrance, cameras smashed, notebooks burned, audio recorders filled with static, and, at one point, a whisper in Hexton's voice, "It showed me the others." They're still walking. They don't know they're dead. After that, the state declared the property off limits indefinitely. The fence was reinforced, motion sensors installed, helicopter flyovers increased. But still, the stories persist. In 2022, a drone operated by a storm chaser caught footage of the house during a thunderstorm. In one frame, clear, undeniable, the back door opens. A figure steps out. Tall, thin, wearing a coat that flaps in a wind no one else feels. The face is blurred, distorted, as if reality itself refuses to focus on it, and in its hand, it holds a camera. Thaddeus's camera. The video went viral, then vanished from the internet within hours, pulled by unknown authorities. The storm chaser claimed he received a visit from men in dark suits who said nothing, only handed him a sealed envelope and left. Inside was a single photograph, his own face, taken from inside his bedroom sometime during the night. No one believes him, but those who've studied the vanishing room know the truth. It doesn't just take people, it replaces them, and the ones who come back aren't really back at all. They're echoes. Echoes with instructions. Now consider this. When you walk through your home, do you count the doors? Do you notice if the hallway feels longer today than it did yesterday? Have you ever stood in a room and thought, just for a moment, that the walls leaned in slightly, as if listening? Because somewhere, deep in the heart of Ohio, a room waits. A room with no right to exist. A room that remembers every footstep, every breath, every name spoken within its walls. And if you listen closely, on the very edge of silence, you might hear it. Not a creak, not the wind, but a whisper, calling yours. A ghost ship drifted into port with a fresh meal on the stove. It was the winter of 1987 when the fishing trawler Marianne V slipped silently into the harbor of Gloucester, Massachusetts, just before dawn on a brittle February morning. No lights flickered from her deck, no voices called out, no radio signals preceded her arrival. She came like a shadow drifting through fog, her bow nudging gently against Pier 6 as if guided by unseen hands. The first to notice her was Elias Thorne, a weathered dockhand with 40 years of salt in his bones and frost still clinging to the brim of his wool cap. He'd arrived early to check lobster traps, steam rising from his coffee cup curling into the pale gray sky. When he saw the vessel listing slightly, Paint peeling like old skin, name barely legible beneath grime, he froze. His breath caught, not from cold, but from instinct. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? Elias approached slowly, boots crunching over frozen patches of seaweed and ice. The Marianne V had been reported missing 3 weeks prior, last seen off the Georges Bank during a sudden nor'easter that had swallowed 2 other boats whole. The Coast Guard had called off search efforts after 10 days, assuming all hands lost, and yet here she was, intact, afloat, and strangely, undisturbed. No signs of storm damage, no gaping holes in the hull, nothing overturned on deck, just silence. A thick, suffocating silence that pressed against Elias's ears like cotton. He called out once, twice, no answer. Then, steeling himself, he climbed aboard. The moment his boot touched the deck, he felt it a chill that wasn't from the wind. It coiled up from the wood beneath him, sharp and unnatural, as though the ship itself were holding its breath. He moved toward the wheelhouse. The door hung open, swaying slightly with the motion of the tide. Inside, the radio crackled with static, a faint loop of Morse code repeating endlessly 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots, SOS, over and over, though the power should have been dead. The logbook lay open on the chart table, the last entry dated February 3rd. Heavy fog. Currents erratic. Can't see land. Something in the water. The handwriting grew jagged, frantic, as if written under duress. Elias flipped back a few pages. Earlier entries spoke of routine hauls, calm seas, even jokes about Captain Rourke's terrible stew. But then, around January 28th, the tone shifted. Crew restless. Emery claims he saw lights beneath the surface, not bioluminescence, too steady, too deep. Emery Vale, third mate, quiet man from inland Maine who rarely spoke unless spoken to. He'd joined the crew only 2 months prior, replacing a man who'd quit mid-season, saying the boat felt haunted. Emery hadn't believed in ghosts, or so the others said. But his journal, found later tucked inside a duffel bag below decks, told a different story. Elias descended the narrow metal stairs into the galley, flashlight beam trembling in his grip, and there, on the cast iron stove, sat a pot, still warm. Steam curled lazily from its cracked lid, carrying the scent of onions, potatoes, and something meaty beef, maybe, or pork. A spoon rested against the rim, crusted with congealing gravy. Beside it, a chipped blue mug held tea, long gone cold, but unmistakably brewed that morning. Or the night before. Or whenever. Time didn't seem to matter here. He backed away, heart hammering. No one could have boarded without being seen. The harbor was monitored, no small craft had entered after midnight, and yet the meal was fresh. As if someone had stepped away just seconds ago. Then he heard it. A soft clink. From the mess hall, like a fork tapping a plate. He turned slowly. The door stood ajar. Darkness pooled beyond it. He pushed it open with the toe of his boot. Tables bolted to the floor. Benches intact. Nothing out of place. Except on the farthest table, set for four plates, each with a portion of stew untouched, forks laid neatly beside them, napkins folded, salt and pepper shakers aligned perfectly. And at the head of the table, a 5th plate. Empty. But the chair was pulled out. As if someone had just risen. Elias didn't scream, he didn't run, he simply stood there, flashlight shaking, breath coming in short white puffs, until the sound came, again not a clink this time, but a whisper, faint, guttural, from the sleeping quarters below. He didn't go down, not then. He scrambled back onto the pier, shouting for help, voice raw with panic. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, the pot on the stove was cold, the steam had vanished. But the stew remained, uneaten, perfectly preserved, as if time had paused mid-bite. Captain Silas Rourke, grizzled veteran of 30 seasons at sea, was never found. Nor were his 3 crewmen, Emery Vale, Harlan Pike, and Jocelyn Crow, the youngest at 23, who'd signed on to save money for nursing school in Portland. Their personal effects were still in their bunks. Photos of family, letters half-written, toothbrushes damp. But no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle, just absence. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. Divers scoured the hull, sonar scanned the seabed, Forensic teams analyzed the stew, confirmed it contained beef, carrots, and barley, cooked within hours of the ship's arrival. No toxins, no hallucinogens, nothing abnormal. Yet every sailor who boarded the Marianne V afterward reported the same thing. The smell of cooking food, even when the stove was cold, the sensation of being watched from empty rooms, whispers in low, guttural tones, always just beyond hearing. One junior officer, Lyle Mander, claimed he saw Emery Vale standing at the railing at 3:17 in the morning, staring into the fog, mouthing words he couldn't understand. When approached, the figure dissolved like mist. The ship was towed to dry dock, declared unsalvageable not due to structural damage, but because morale among crews plummeted. Men refused to work on her. Mechanics reported tools going missing, only to reappear in locked lockers. Electricians swore lights turned on by themselves, dim and flickering, casting long shadows that moved against the walls. By April, the decision was made. The Marianne V would be scuttled, sunk in deep water beyond the continental shelf, where currents would carry her far from shipping lanes. The ceremony was brief. No flags, no speeches, just a single flare shot into the twilight sky as charges detonated along her keel. She sank slowly, bow first, vanishing beneath the waves with an almost ceremonial grace. But here's what they didn't report, what never made the official logs. 3 days later, a Norwegian freighter, the Fjordwind, radioed the Boston Maritime Authority from 50 miles east of Sable Island. They'd spotted wreckage, part of a wooden table, scorched at the edges, floating amid a slick of oil. Attached to it, miraculously preserved in a sealed plastic sleeve, was a page torn from Emery Vale's journal. The handwriting was frantic, ink smudged as if written in haste or fear. "They're not dead. We never left. The ship doesn't sink. It drifts, it waits, it feeds. The stove is always warm, the table is always set, and one day it will come back. With a fresh meal. For us." The page was authenticated, handwriting matched samples from Emery's personnel file, ink consistent with pens issued to crew, but how it survived explosion, fire, and ocean pressure, no scientist could explain. And then, on the evening of December 9th, 2012, a local fisherman named Corwin Haskins reported seeing a vessel matching the Marianne V's description near Jeffrey's Ledge. Fog was heavy that night, visibility near zero. He claimed the ship passed within 20 feet of his boat, lights dark, decks empty. But from her galley window, a yellow glow pulsed like a stove lit below. He tried hailing her, no response. When he turned to grab his radio, she was gone. Vanished into the mist. No wreckage was found, no trace on radar. The Coast Guard dismissed it as a mirage, a trick of the light. But Corwin insisted, said he smelled stew in the air, beef, carrots, barley, and underneath something darker, metallic, like blood. To this day, Gloucester fishermen avoid that stretch of water after sunset, especially in winter, especially when the fog rolls in thick and silent. Some say if you listen closely on still nights, you can hear the Morse code 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots echoing from beneath the waves. Others claim to see a faint glow beneath the surface, drifting with the current like a lantern in the deep. And every year, around February 10th, a single bouquet of wilted wildflowers appears on the railing of Pier 6. No note, no signature. Just flowers brown at the edges, salt stiffened, as if carried across the sea. Left there, some say, by someone who never came home. But perhaps the most unsettling detail, the one that lingers in the mind long after the story ends, is this. When authorities finally cleaned out the galley before scuttling the ship, they found something odd in the cupboard. A can of stew. Store-bought, label faded, best before date, October 12th, 1986. Expired over a year earlier, yet the can was warm to the touch. And when opened, it was full. Steaming. Fresh. As if just heated. No one ate it. It was incinerated along with the rest. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right through the rigging of moored boats, people swear they can smell it, that rich, savory aroma. Onions, potatoes, meat slow-cooked for hours. And they wonder, who was it meant for? And more importantly, is the table still set? The sea keeps its secrets well, but every now and then, it returns them to drift into port, unannounced, uninvited, with a fresh meal on the stove and chairs waiting to be filled. So the next time you walk past an empty dock and the wind carries the faint scent of cooking food, ask yourself, was that the neighbor's dinner? Or something else? Something older? Something hungrier? Something that remembers your name and knows when you'll be home?
The stories. Why these ranger station receipts still don't add up. In the fall of 2016, a set of receipts found at a remote ranger station raised more questions than answers. The station sat near a state forest in northern Oregon, surrounded by tall fir trees and steep dirt trails. It was used mostly during summer fire patrols, but in October it was supposed to be empty. Yet someone had been there recently enough to leave coffee stains on the counter and fresh tire tracks outside. The main caretaker that year was a 41-year-old ranger named Ellis Grady. He had worked for the state forestry department for over a decade and was known for being organized. When Ellis went missing for 2 days in early November, his coworkers assumed his truck had broken down on the backroads again. He returned quietly that Wednesday morning, pale and distracted, claiming he had been checking fire cameras deeper in the valley. But when the office assistant filed his expense paperwork, she noticed something strange about his fuel receipts. The dates and amounts didn't match the department's card records. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? At first, no one paid much attention. Rangers often paid for fuel out of pocket and turned in the slips later. But the accounting team flagged the entries because they came from a gas station nearly 70 miles off his assigned patrol route. The receipts were time-stamped 2 nights before he returned, right around the time he was unreachable by radio. The manager called him in for a short meeting, but Ellis brushed it off, saying he must have grabbed the wrong slips. Then he went back to work like nothing had happened. 2 weeks later, the night duty ranger stopped at the same outpost and noticed the door unlocked. Inside, lights were on, and someone had clearly been there. Coffee was still warm in the mug, and a jacket hung on the hook near the door. A few papers sat on the counter, pinned under a half-eaten granola bar. When the ranger flipped one over, he saw a receipt from the same station near the coast, dated that very day. It had Ellis's signature at the bottom. When questioned again, Ellis looked shaken. He admitted he had been there that morning, but claimed he just liked driving the scenic route to clear his head. His supervisor didn't find that convincing. The ranger station wasn't even close to the coastal highway. The dirt road leading there was partially blocked by fallen branches from the last storm, and no patrol had been assigned west of the ridge in weeks. Later, one of the younger rangers named Lydia found Ellis's old logbook. Inside, the last few pages were torn out. The remaining entries mentioned several trips out to check Tower 17, a decommissioned lookout on a ridge above an old mining road. That tower had been boarded up for years after a small landslide shifted the foundation. Nobody was supposed to go near it, but the receipts, when mapped, showed a pattern leading right in that direction. In December, a state audit began. Investigators collected the receipts and compared timestamps with the department's truck GPS logs. The logs confirmed that Ellis's vehicle had gone off-route 3 times in late October. Each time, he stayed parked in the same area for several hours. No maintenance work or inspections had been scheduled there. When the auditors interviewed Ellis, he denied staying overnight and insisted the logs were inaccurate. Still, his supervisor noticed the smell of mildew and campfire smoke on his jacket, as if he had been sleeping outdoors. A retired ranger named Hal, who used to work those trails, came forward after hearing rumors. He told the auditors that Tower 17 wasn't completely empty. Inside the storage room below the lookout floor, there were boxes of old survey records and equipment, some of which had been used decades earlier to mark water boundaries. He said if anyone wanted to hide something out there, it would go unnoticed for months. That prompted a small search. 2 rangers and a deputy hiked up to the ridge on a mild January morning. They found tire tracks that matched the department vehicle and a flattened patch of grass behind the tower. Inside, they found the storage boxes Hal mentioned. Most were filled with faded maps and water samples sealed in glass jars. But under one box was a torn envelope containing several small gas receipts folded together. Each had Ellis's handwriting and the same coastal gas station stamp. When Ellis was told about this discovery, he reportedly said, "Then someone's messing with me." He claimed he had never been inside that tower and suggested maybe someone else had used his name. But handwriting experts later confirmed that the signatures were consistent with his previous expense forms. It wasn't conclusive evidence of wrongdoing, but it didn't make sense either. The total fuel listed on those receipts was more than his truck could even hold. The Forest Department quietly placed Ellis on leave while they continued looking into what he was doing on those off-route trips. They interviewed people from nearby towns, asking if anyone had seen a white government pickup in late October. A mechanic from a service station 20 miles south recalled a man in a ranger uniform buying fuel from a portable drum around that time. He couldn't be sure it was Ellis, but he remembered the guy paid cash and seemed in a hurry. By early spring, the case went cold. The department moved on, Ellis resigned, and the receipts were boxed up with the rest of the audit files. But in 2019, a new ranger named Theo discovered something while clearing out the same outpost. He found a metal coffee tin hidden behind a loose board under the counter. Inside were several folded papers, damp but legible. They were fuel receipts again, all from that same coastal station. The latest date was November 3rd, 2016, the night Ellis had gone missing. Each receipt had strange notes scribbled on the back. One read, "No radio past Ridge." Another said, "3 lights south of tower." The handwriting matched Ellis's older logs. The department contacted him again, but he refused to comment. A few weeks later, he reportedly moved to Montana and stopped responding to emails. Since then, the receipts have been filed in the regional archive. Some employees still talk about the case, mostly as a cautionary tale. Every few years, new staff find copies during routine checks and bring them up again, wondering what he was doing out there. The gas station itself closed down in 2017, so no new records could be verified. The old cashier who worked there remembered a quiet man in uniform coming in several times that fall, always after midnight, always buying coffee and fuel, never talking much. No criminal charges were ever filed. The department concluded there wasn't enough evidence to prove misconduct, only inconsistencies in the paperwork. Yet to this day, those ranger station receipts still don't add up. Some say Ellis was running a side job with off-book fuel sales. Others think he was covering up something that happened near that old tower. But whatever the truth was, it remains buried somewhere in the hills beyond the ridge, where the radios still go silent and the trail signs fade away each winter.